Today I would be talking about Bacon. His one of his essays on friendship is there in your syllabus, and Bacon is a great essayist, and he was described by Pope as the wisest, brightest, and meanest of mankind. He was very intellectual, and his intellect was of a very high order. He was very laborious, and he had put in great effort to write prose. And as far as life is concerned, he had all types of incidents in his life. Sometimes people say he betrayed his own people who had done a lot of favor to him, and then he prosecuted his own friends. Then he was tried for a case, and he was found guilty. He was charged of taking bribes, and he was sentenced to imprisonment. So, all these types of things which are there, which reflect upon his character, that he was quite cunning, or he was quite corrupt, as far as normal lifestyle was concerned, are there. Then he left the world with a lot of debts which were against him, and that is why people think he had very disputable virtues, and he had lived a life which was questionable by many of his contemporaries. But as far as his writing styles were concerned, as far as his contribution to English essays, to English prose writings is concerned, he was a master of writing prose. And he himself wrote that I have taken all knowledge to my province. And then he said he wanted to use knowledge for further scientific discovery. And it was alleged against him that he did not make much of the scientific discoveries, but his essays, which are philosophical, which are literary, or which are of practical, moral, or political purposes, those essays which he wrote in his volumes after volumes, those essays are considered par excellence. And he it is said that many writers of English essays later on followed him, and he is his vigor, or his precision, or the way he quoted things, his arguments, his distinctive literary styles were called works of prose art. They were called works of prose art by many of the critics. And as far as writing is concerned, his writings, as I said, they are basically all these types of writings which are there by Bacon. These writings were for the sake of the readers, were divided into three categories: philosophical writings, literary writings, and professional writings. And then his essays are based on history. Many of his essays, he in many of his essays he reflects upon many historical events. Then some of his essays are he's writing as a political and moral thinker, and in some of his essays he's writing as a scientific thinker. In some of his writing essays he's writing as a philosophical thinker. In his essays where he's writing as a historian, his writing about the reign of Henry VII, and then when he's writing as a political and moral thinker, he is continuously writing on topics which are related to morality, topics which were related to politics of that time, and even these essays are they have such a noble and powerful sentiments, as people would get influenced, or they would carry those people very intellectually to another plinth. But some of these essays are, again, as I said, the way he lived his own life. Some of these essays were very practical in their utterances. Like when he talks about the feeling of love, he calls it child of folly. Then but these essays are widely read because they are full of practical wisdom, and they come home to men's business and bosoms. He is some way not preaching things of the spirit and the soul. He is most of the time concerned with life and world, and how human nature should be or is at different phases of life. And then some of his critics call him that it is the art of success among men which is the subject to his essays. And then we have people who are saying he points man to the part he should play on the stage of special life, as is indicated in the subtitles of the book Counsel, Civil and Moral. Then, as morals of this world, his sayings have great force and weight. And then many of his proverbs have become very famous. And he has written at length about the topics of routine life. And sometimes people find that some of these essays become dull because they are full of practical thoughts. And when they are full of practical thoughts, his practical utterances sometimes become boring to people, or sometimes become too much matter of fact for thinkers. Then we have his essays on science, or where he projects prose writings, where he projects himself as a scientific thinker. But when we are reading these prose writings, we should not be looking into any particular discoveries. In fact, he did not know very well the many problems connected with scientific inquiry in his own time, and he still wanted to make discoveries, or through truth, through the instrument of truth, he wanted to go deep into scientific queries. And as some of the critics have underrated such queries by him, and he is called that these inquiries were naturally gratified by the dignity which he gave to their labors, and encouraged by the prospects which he held out. He gave to science a human interest. He gave it high hopes and a definite aim. But as far as any special inquiry, or as a special discovery is related, there were not much discoveries on his part, and he was basically not a scientist. He was a writer. But as per the fashions of the time, He projected himself as a scientific thinker. He projected himself as someone who wanted to make an inquiry, as someone who wanted to make a discovery, as someone who wanted to find out a truth. And this is how his essays were. And then these the scientific discoveries in itself is not so important as the faith that science is an important field of human activity which could open up the secrets of nature. Bacon is not historically negligible a scientific thinker. His scientific deficiency does not essentially weaken the force of his message, and that message was to give importance to science. And he did not want to accept anything arbitrarily, and that is why he used to interrogate. And that interrogation or that inquiry into any nature of topic, that inquiry in itself was very scientific. uh, he was basically he was a lawyer statesman, and he not only summoned up man, as one of the critics said, to research. He brought the Cinderella of science out of her partial obscurity and enthroned her as the queen of the world. No one any longer could be deaf to the scientific and humanitarian gospel of experiment, invention, utility, and progress. So, this comment by one of his critics, and this comment is by Bush, is apt, because when he says Cinderella of science, when he calls him Cinderella of science, he knows Bacon was basically influenced by Elizabethan writers, and Elizabethan writers were dreamers in themselves. They were influenced by Renaissance, and they had emotions and imaginations at the forefront. So all these aspects cannot be ignored when he was writing prose, or when he was making an inquiry into science, or when he wanted his essays to have a scientific orientation, because somewhere we should be able to appreciate the fact that the faith for science was there. He had a great faith for science, and he had a great zeal also to give to make whatever he's writing, or to make his essays accurate. And that is why he wanted that every writer should be basically a scientific thinker. He was the first man to point out the importance of experiment in the study of knowledge. He was the first man who laughed at the ideas of authority based on scientific observation. Once arbitrary authority has been replaced by critical inquiry and experiment, science in its true sense had taken birth. Bacon's contribution in this respect is very outstanding, and it is in itself very unique. Then, when we talk of Bacon as a philosophical thinker, then we have Bacon's we have to accept that when Bacon wrote, he wrote with a great force, and he in his essays included legal, historical, and moral aspects, which were very valuable at that time. And when he was writing, he wanted to increase the storehouse of knowledge, and he wanted to make men powerful over nature, because when he was writing, there were many discoveries made, and there was a feeling of inquiry. There was a lot of interest among people who wanted to know new things, or he wanted to validate whatever they had believed so far. So Bacon was living in an atmosphere which was an atmosphere of questioning everything. So his thinking like this or writing in this fashion was natural, and there were many malpractices which were prevalent in the area of science, in the area of nature. So somewhere he wanted to put things into their right frame. He wanted to prove those things through scientific methods or through scientific inquiry, and write things which were valid, and make them available to people for the ages to come. For today, I think this introduction to Bacon would be enough for you, and in our next lectures I would be talking about the essay which is there in our syllabus by Bacon. Thank you.